again, I welcome you to today's session about AI for social good. Before we start, I would like to thank the Sustainable Educational Foundation for giving me this opportunity, giving me this platform to reach out to you guys. And I would like to thank everyone working here in the Sustainable Educational Foundation. Yes, I would like to thank everyone working in the Sustainable Educational Foundation for helping me with the techie stuff, getting this live video together, and also for helping me all the way until we got here. And also, I would like to appreciate the service and the effort that this foundation is putting into encourage you and inspiring budding Sri Lankan crowd to think out of the box and do great things and helping to enable that. Today we are going to talk about AI for social good, and my expectation is to do a presentation for about 40 to 45 minutes and open the platform for questions. One thing I would like to say is during the presentation I will not be seeing your comments, so if you have any questions, I would like you to note them down, and when we get to the Q&A session, we will answer the questions by, you can post it on the comments and I can answer those questions. Okay, so now let's go back to the presentation. Great. So I'll start briefly talking a bit about myself, just to give a brief. I'm Sahan Bulathwela. I'm currently affiliated with Center for Artificial Intelligence at University College London. I am working in a project called X5 Gone, which is funded by the European Union. And the key objective of the project is to leverage artificial intelligence and open educational resources to harness quality education for everyone. If we talk about my research interests, I am very interested in understanding how humans learn and how knowledge should be represented in general. And while working on this, I use building educational recommendation systems as an application use case that I can use to develop these technologies. And currently I'm working mainly with Bayesian learning. So what is Bayesian learning? Bayesian learning is trying to exploit or trying to incorporate laws of conditional probability to estimate the uncertainty of a possible outcome, and you try to update your model of the data generation process with more data coming to you as evidence. So apart from my work, in my work, one of the other major parts that I'm working on is I'm developing this platform through the project called x5learn.org, which is an AI-powered learning platform where you can discover and consume open educational resources. We will get to these things a bit later. And you can find my blog posts about big data, data revolution, AI, in my WordPress blog. And if you want to get more information about my educational background and what type of work I did to get here, you can go to my website, and all that information is available there. So today's plan is I'm going to quickly skim through what AI is and what machine learning is. I'm pretty sure, like, from looking at the series, I've seen several presenters have touched this topic in detail, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'm mainly going to touch over so that everyone's on the same page, and then I'm going to convince you what AI for social good is, and the need for AI for social good, and then how AI for social good can go wrong, and eventually talk about how certain aspects of that are fundamental to AI for social good are now becoming more and more important in mainstream AI practice as well. In a very brief moment, what is artificial intelligence? So Wikipedia defines artificial intelligence that is to do with intelligent agents that perceives its environment and takes actions to maximize its chance of successfully achieving its goals. So we all know artificial intelligence is mainly mathematical functions that recognize patterns. So that is the way of it perceiving its environment. And how are these patterns driven? These patterns are driven by having to maximize its chance to successfully achieve its goals, which are the metrics that are used to train these algorithms. So in a nutshell, when you look at AI, you need to think about the data and the metrics. And AI has been gaining a lot of traction in the last few years. We want to understand why that is, because AI has been around until since 1960s. And why has AI become very useful and very important now? The first thing is the amount of digital data that is being generated in the world has boomed in the last few years. The computation, the cost of computing, storing, and communicating data, models, and anything digital has drastically become cheaper. And we also have to mention here the innovations of hardware such as GPU computations that have led to the renaissance of deep learning. And the last bit that we cannot forget is how we have improved our state of the art knowledge about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence in 1990s was looked at, like, for example, like Kismet, and now when we think about AI, we think about something like Alexa. And it's been a long way since then, and we've come a long way even rethinking the amount or the degree of Turing testing we do on our AI, because AI is becoming more and more competent and even outperforming humans in certain tasks such as image recognition and board game playing, for example. So now we've had a brief inspiration or motivation about why AI has become important. I'm going to now shed your attention to AI for social good. So what is AI for social good? AI for social good is not a new concept. AI for social good has been in the conversation, which has evolved for about 30 years now. So the inception of this concept could be rooted to technology for social good, which has been around for about 30 years, where people were thinking about how technology can be used to achieve social good. And from that, in the recent years, there have been initiatives such as DataKind, Base Impact, Data Science for Sustainable Goals, AI for All, Update.org. This type of organizations have branched out from technology for social good and now has evolved into this new concept, which started off as data for social good and now has niched into artificial intelligence for social good. Knowing artificial intelligence for social good concept is quite important, because in the recent years there's both industrial and academic interest in understanding about this concept and actioning towards societal good through artificial intelligence. So first we will look at a few definitions that people have, leading organizations have put out about artificial intelligence. So the Google AI definition mainly focuses on a few things. It has to meaningfully improve people's lives, and it has to address hard unanswered questions. Now we look at McKinsey and Company, and they also talk about most challenging social problems. They talk about United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and also about helping people. If we go a bit further from there, we can see that if we look at the academic side, where the computing community and the AAAI, which is the Association for Advancement of Artificial Intelligence, in their workshops they've derived that AI has to do with societal challenging problems and tremendous social good in the future. So in a nutshell, what do these definitions tell us? more or less these definitions, all of them involve artificial intelligence. Of course, we are talking about artificial intelligence for social good. It involves, it associates with the well-being of the society. So there's good for the society. There's also something about tackling hard problems, because easy problems, we've already established a lot of ways to deal with them, and we are currently using AI to tackle the hard problems. And it also links to the future, where you talk about how we can sustain ourselves for the future with these solutions. And all of these things link to another set of frameworks that we have already established about working for the future with the societal good, which are United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So now let's look at what United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are. The good thing about here is that unlike AI for social good, which has different definitions coming from different organizations or academia, which share the same essence, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, for example, have had the opportunity to formalize things and be a lot more precise in terms of a concrete definition. So we are going to look at what Sustainable Development Goals are. Sustainable Development Goals is an agenda adopted and agreed by all United Nations states in 2015, and it is in summary a blueprint to enable peace and prosperity for people on the planet. It's decades of work that has led to the Sustainable Development Goals. Imagine like the effort to get 178 all members of the United Nations to agree on such a large amount of information and a plan that is so detailed. So it in a nutshell consists of 17 goals that we want to achieve by 2030. And if you want to get more information about these sustainable development goals, you have the link over there. You can go there and look for it. So now we are going to look at the need for artificial intelligence for sustainable development goals. So before doing that, we are going to look at a few key points that we want to focus on. So the key takeaways from the previous two sections, which is about the AI and the definition of artificial intelligence for social good, is most AI for social good definitions share the same essence. So the essence is to do with AI, to do with the future, to do with the societal good, and to tackle hard problems. And for being pragmatic, many stakeholders think that sustainable development goals provide a good background to frame and measure the success of AI for sustainable development goals movement. Therefore, it is a good practice and it is a well-known practice to associate sustainable AI for social good with sustainable development goals. So in the next section, I'm going to try to convince you that AI for social good is needed, and also show a few projects that focus on AI for social good. So let's get into AI for social good, some of the potential cases that artificial intelligence can be used. So here are a few applications that I've randomly picked. This is not a full set, and this is not a representative set, because there are so many different aspects of social problems that AI could address. Here one of the things I picked is education. Then another one you can see is fake news, fighting misinformation. There's agriculture, climate change, criminal justice, and even niche use cases such as preserving cultural heritage or preserving animal life. The thing here to notice is, if you look at the title, the if in this if AI could help is fading by the day, because a lot of organizations are now starting to apply artificial intelligence to address these problems. We haven't achieved 100% success in most of these problems yet, but there is a huge uptake, and there is a strong movement that is working towards addressing these problems. So, but one thing we need to think about is being helpful. If AI being helpful in solving these problems enough? The answer to that comes, I take from one of the startups in Montreal, which is called Element AI. If you know about AI, for example, like in a bit more context, it's a startup based in Montreal that is co-founded by Professor Yoshua Bengio. He's one of the leading researchers and one of the godfathers of artificial intelligence at the present. And he's also one of those core people in the community who is advocating the importance of artificial intelligence for social good. And as part of their organization doing responsible artificial intelligence, they focus on these things. They say, we work hard to ensure that AI is designed, developed, and deployed in service of the public good, not because it is one possible path to save AI among many, but because it is the only way. There is some truth to this, because if we want to make sure that AI makes progress or leads to progress in the whole society, we need to make sure that our niche problems that we solve do not cause a ripple effect that will cause a lot of negative impact in the complex system of the society. And one of the core characteristics of AI is that it is complex, and it can change things very fast, faster than a human can usually digest information with. Therefore, we need to be cautious that we have sufficient control over the consequences when we design AI solutions. And we can only do that by being proactively cautious about thinking ahead of what could be the repercussions of AI solutions that we propose. So now we'll look at some success stories. So there are a few success stories that have been documented about AI for social good. And some of these things, I will start with this concept called Petrol. Troll Petrol is a AI solution that has been built in the US to detect abuse of female politicians in social media. And then there's monitoring cassava disease, and a farmer marketplace that has been successfully deployed in Uganda with the use of AI. Then you can use satellite imagery to predict poverty by looking at the roofs of a neighborhood. You can try to find out how dense a particular population is, if they have heating, if they have roads and whatnot. Based on that, try to understand if people are, in extreme poverty or not. Then there's also, more serious use cases, such as, detecting burned down villages in the conflict zones in the country of Darfur. And then there is also, there's so many different complex problems in climate change that we need to address, that it has spinned out into a new field called climate informatics. So this slide will convince you that there are numerous ways artificial intelligence can be used for social good. And something that you can also see from this slide is that most of these use cases can be also very straightforwardly associated with sustainable development goals. Another thing I would point out in this particular slide is that you would notice that most of these use cases associate with multiple sustainable development goals. I will get to why that is important in the next section, but for now, just keep in mind that one problem might associate with multiple development goals, from which I would go to the project that I am affiliated with right now. Just to briefly explain to you what we are doing at UCL. So I'm working in this project called X5 GONE, which stands for cross-modal, cross-cultural, cross-lingual, cross-domain, cross-site, global, open educational resource network. So one might not know what an open educational resource is. An open educational resource is a educational resource that is freely accessible and is openly licensed. And it could be useful for teaching, learning, and assessing as well as research purposes. So these are educational resources that teachers make with effort and release to the public domain with no commercial intentions or copyright restrictions. These are very powerful because they can really help educational scenarios in developing nations or even in the developed nations, where the teacher pool you have access to might not have the best capacity to address the learning requirements of a learning population. What do we want to do in this project? We want to find different open educational resources that are scattered around in the internet. So if you can see from this map, you can see a bunch of bubbles with numbers. These numbers are not the number of educational resources that are scattered in different parts of the world. These are the number of repositories. These are the number of collections of educational resources that we know are open but are scattered around the world. So what we are trying to do is to use artificial intelligence to discover them, and then we want to understand them. We want to enrich them with multilingual translations, and we want to associate them with Wikipedia concepts so that people can get a better understanding of these materials and so on, and then present these materials to the appropriate learner at the right time. With some of the technologies that we've now built an intelligent learning platform that is publicly available at x5learn.org. So if you can look at, if you see this particular screen, you could see several places where AI is being used. So one of the things is that you can search for materials, and then if you look at the material results itself, we've annotated or enriched these materials with Wikipedia concepts. We can use this technology called entity linking, which is an AI concept that can be used to do this, and which will allow people to search inside videos and lengthy educational materials more efficiently. And then if you look at the left side, there is this playlist. There's a collection of materials that a teacher can compile together so that they can create a playlist and share with their students. And there is this blue button called optimize learning path, where we use artificial intelligence to look at the different contents of the lectures and try to reorder the lectures in a way that we think it makes sense in terms of how knowledge should be taught to students. We are currently working with about 100,000 materials with thousands of videos indexed, and we are processing and indexing thousands of more videos right now. And as you can see, there's translations. There's a whole plethora of AI that goes into this platform, and we've also made it very transparent. There is a button on the left top side called unveil the AI, where if you switch that button on, it will show the different places in the interface where AI is used, and you can go to descriptions or demos of how that AI works. So this is one of the examples. Now some of the key takeaways of so some of the key takeaways from the previous section is that designing AI for good of the public is important and the only way forward, as Element AI puts it. And that is mainly because controlling and changing the consequences of a already released AI is very hard. So therefore it is better to proactively think about what could go wrong, and then work with a defensive approach towards building more reliable AI for societal good. However, like several use cases that I demonstrated earlier also demonstrate that AI for social good is feasible and possible, and usually they are associated with one or more sustainable development goals. And from here on, I'm again trying to tell you, however, it's not a stairway to heaven. In this section, I'm going to show you how AI for social good can go wrong. And I think you will find the reference picture funny. This is something I have to live with every day, working with artificial intelligence in my day-to-day life. AI thinks I am Satan. So going to different use cases where AI has not been done that well. One of the more prominent and familiar use cases that we know about is facial recognition. Facial recognition is a very common AI based technology that we are very familiar with. If you go to Facebook, Facebook automatically asks in pictures if you are this person, if this is a face. A lot of cameras use it to focus on the faces, and most of our smartphones and laptops use it as a security measure, and they will only respond to our faces. But this gets very serious very fast. It is used in e-passport immigration counters. It is used in policing. And the problem is that, these things are good because, if you look at the sustainable development goals, it harvests innovative production, and also it establishes stronger institutions and governments. But however, our experience with this technology hasn't been that sweet. There have been various studies that have shown that minorities are misidentified in facial recognition software, and this is very problematic when it comes to intelligence surveillance because people can be misclassified as criminals. And in this picture, if you look very closely, you could see, I mean, this is probably a hypothetical futuristic use case which is hopefully not real. It will look at a face and rate the person as the degree of terroristic look or degree of rebellious look, and these things can be very dangerous in the wrong hands or in the not so informed hands. If you're going for a job interview and your organization considers this type of information, you might be marginalized for a very insane reason. So this is one aspect of how AI can go wrong. And in this particular scenario, I'm going to talk about another use case coming from Kenya, where they used artificial intelligence to assist education. So the technical outcome that they were looking for was they collected some data from the school system and they built a machine learning model that can predict if a student is likely to score below average in the final exam. And this is really good because you can predict it 2 years before the final exam by looking at the data of the student 2 years prior to the exam, which will leave enough time for the school system to intervene with the student and try to convert him towards the success side. But the real outcome was that when the researchers deployed this system, 70% of the students were being classified as likely to get below average marks, which demanded the school system to proactively intervene to these students and try to help them additionally. But the problem was, one of the fundamental problems that they had when they started the whole solution building was that we don't have enough teachers. Get us machine learning and AI to help with the situation, but it went the other way because you needed more teachers to help these students, which meant that a lot of schools were very reluctant to adopt this system, which will eventually lead to less or no overall social good. So this is another scenario where when you don't align the external stakeholders that are apart from the technology in the process, there might be room for failure there. And one of the very interesting, and in this type of talks I like to relate to some of the things that are very close to us in heart. We look at Facebook and Sri Lanka. So if we, in a nutshell, if you look at the Facebook's vision from their technology is to bring the world closer together. Their full mission statement states, we want to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. that reflects that we can't do this ourselves, but only by empowering people to build communities and bring people together. This vision is a great vision. It's a great idea. And the thing is, many of us can wholeheartedly get on board with this mission. But the problem is, AI has a huge role to play in this vision because there is so much information coming into this content machine. And in order for people to unite and to bring people together, you need to, as a AI based powered system, as a system in general, you need to figure out how to personalize materials, how to personalize content, how to personalize people that are exposed to you in your day-to-day Facebook journey. And this heavily involves artificial intelligence. And as you can see, it can go horribly wrong. And the thing is, it is a very complex system that is very hard to think how it could go wrong, but eventually there are ways that it could lead to catastrophic disasters. And the problem is, we need to acknowledge that there are potential flaws, because if you have visibility of the flaws, we can manage them, and even better, prevent them. So looking at these slides, there are a few aspects of how AI can go wrong that we can think of. In a nutshell, we need to do responsible innovation, where we think that the superset of requirements that go beyond, and we need to consider the non-functional requirements of the AI as much as and as importantly as we consider the functional requirements, the obvious solution that the stakeholders are looking for. In social good projects, due to the nature of the stakeholders, there's a lot of diverse people playing a role that are both technical and non-technical, that need to work together to make sure that the AI system leads to eventual social betterment. And what this means is that as engineers or as technological stakeholders, we might have to think more in terms of accounting for the non-technical aspects of the problem that are essential to getting the overall system running as a smooth machine. And eventually, we also need to think about the big picture, because in most of the questions, as I argued earlier, social good projects are associated with multiple sustainable development goals. And in my previous example, I only pointed out the combination of sustainable development goals that have a positive impact from the project. But there are possibilities that, a solution that is leading to positive impact in a subset of sustainable development goals might also compromise a different set of sustainable development goals. So if we take a few examples for this, if we incorporate, if we encourage people, if as a government, let's say we subsidize companies that want to build AI in their businesses, the problem is, by doing that, we need to think, by passing down policies or passing down technologies that will enable businesses to leverage AI, are we compromising the fact that it might lead to an increase of the wealth gap in the country, which heavily compromises eradicating poverty? In another use case that is close to my heart, personalized education. By providing personalized education to a nation that maybe not have a lot of tech savvy tech influence, are we increasing the gap between the privileged and the underprivileged? These are certain factors we need to account for when we design sustainable solutions that are going to lead to social good. So in a nutshell, the key takeaways from the previous section are, even though if AI is done for good, it can still go wrong. And we also, from the experience from the previous section, we found a few ways to mitigate that. One of the ways is to adapt to the culture and think of these solutions as mission critical systems that should build trust within the communities rather than something that is meant to solve a problem. If we have a few mess-ups on the way, that is totally acceptable, like a startup or like a commercial rapid prototyping. We need to think with a different mindset because there's a lot of vulnerable people involved, sometimes lives are on the line, and we need to be a lot more responsible when we are designing and transitioning, translating these technologies into the systems that we want to see impact. The other thing is we need to account to the different stakeholders that go beyond technology, such as people and processes, and we need to make sure that we critically accommodate these other non-technical aspects as part of the AI solution to guarantee the success of the system as a whole. And then we also need to understand the interplay between the different objectives of different sustainable development goals, and if we are compromising a lot of them at the cost of succeeding in one, or how can we actually balance them out. And finally, given that there are many additional boxes to, one of the key things you would understand from everything that I'm arguing right now is that in order to build a very robust AI solution for social good, you need to tick a lot of boxes that are usually not that important in a conventional AI system, at least at this moment. And the problem is the go-to solution for this is to usually abandon the project or to say this solution does not work. But a more intriguing solution would be to try a bit more harder to find ways to fill in those boxes and come up with an even better solution. And in this section, I'm going to now talk about from the bad that we've seen about AI. Researchers have learned certain things about how we could make things better. And one of the key concepts about sustainable AI for social good is that a lot of key stakeholders that come from diverse background had to collaborate together to make sure that they are successful. And from projects that have been happening over and over again for the last few years, we've managed to come up with the guidelines to make these collaborations more successful. And some of these items are quite sensible. For example, expectations of what is possible with AI need to be well grounded. You need to tell the NGO or the government or any social entity that is expecting the technology sector to provide AI solutions to be honest about setting the expectations right, because there is a very sensitive area of trust that needs to be managed very carefully. Then there has to be value, and there is value in simple solutions, which we will learn in the next section more detailed, because most of the places that really benefit from social good are very scarce in terms of resources. So we need to work with simple elegant solutions that are easy to understand and easy to deploy, easy to maintain, and etc. So there are a few other points here, and I would pretty much summarize them very quickly, where in AI there are more constraints because you need to take into account the ethical aspect, the fairness aspect, including everyone in the solution. So there are additional constraints or requirements that need to be thought through before we go about finding an AI solution for societal good. Then there are different actors. We are not just working with our CTO or the CEO or the head of research who's trying to get a model that does 20% more in terms of click-through rate. It's very different. We are working with NGOs, sometimes volunteers who might not have the deep learning knowledge we have, who might not understand uncertainty the way we do. So we need to work with non-technical people domain experts who have different value systems than us, and we need to accommodate these values and try to understand what is the more suitable solution. Than is this going to be beat the state of the art? So there are different needs that have to be met with different actors, and eventually which will lead to different metrics. The metrics we use to measure success in social good projects are fairly different from what we would use in a conventional AI system. In a conventional AI system, if you're familiar with artificial intelligence, there are certain evaluation metrics that can be used to measure the performance of the model. But in these type of scenarios, we have to accommodate additional metrics such as that will maximize the fairness, that will look at optimal resource utilization, and sometimes it could be to do with multiple objectives. You want to educate everyone while minimizing the gap between the privileged and the underprivileged. You want to encourage organizations to adopt AI without half the workforce ending up being unemployed. So there are additional objectives, multiple objectives that have to interplay in finding the optimal solution. And now that we have looked at these guidelines a bit, we are going to look at one last use case where some of these things can be evident. So I'm looking at deep learning Imbaba, which is a deep learning community project that is built in Africa. So the objective of this project is to build bridges between the developed world, who have a lot of AI infrastructure, AI skill and experts, with technologists and stakeholders in Africa. And this project is associated with two main sustainable development goals. One is fostering innovation, because if you can inculcate deep learning technologies in African region, you are fostering innovation, building new products, building smart products. And also 17, strong partnerships. How do we build better partnerships between communities to succeed as a globe rather than individual nations or niche communities? And the outcomes from these projects are they work together to build language translation models to a lot of low resource data set languages in Africa. They've built on models that will improve predicting malaria and to eradicate malaria. A lot of people in Africa can't write or read, so they've come up with technologies that can transcribe people's spoken language to be able to go to a bank and get their work done, for example. So these are certain solutions where two communities have worked together in order to create positive change. And if we look at it in the perspective of the guidelines that we saw earlier, there's inclusive accessible applications, because you're thinking about an inclusive design. We want to make sure that anyone who goes to the hospital can communicate or fill the form without being marginalized if you've had a formal education or not. So you have this inclusion aspect, and it builds long-term partnerships, because the whole objective of the project is to get the experts from Europe, Americas, or any other place to work with the technologists and stakeholders in Africa to build things together, so that on the long term we end up building a skilled workforce in Africa who can become the thought leaders, who are more familiar and who are close at heart to the problems at home, who can make more long lasting impact. And there's diverse stakeholders, because you work with forest reservation officials, politicians, fighting corruption, and doctors. There's very different diverse set of users. And it builds trust, because you are making incremental change that eventually leading AI causing or leading to a better quality of life for the region. and you are sharing knowledge and resources, and because of the trust, the people also become more receptive to the technologies and working with these people and accepting knowledge and resources. So this is another use case that I looked at, and the other thing that I would like to also point out here is that what Imbaba is doing is to use the expertise from the developed world to build talent in grassroots, much like what the Sustainable Educational Foundation is trying to do here in Sri Lanka, where they are going around trying to find people who can bring some interesting perspective to interested students, enthusiastic students here in Sri Lanka, and try to inculcate that. So in a way, these things are very, like, the spirit of social good are very common in general. And from social good, we go to another niche concept called AI for developing nations. So what is AI for developing nations? AI for developing nations is a subset of problems in AI for social good that are very specific to the developing nations. So the thing is, inclusive education is a problem throughout the world. Eradicating poverty is a problem in Europe, or is a problem in the United Kingdom as much as it is in Sri Lanka. There are a lot of homeless people in the United Kingdom as much as there are homeless people in Sri Lanka. So those can be looked at as, problems that are addressed towards the whole society. Whereas there are certain projects that have a very niche, connection to the developing nations, where some of the resources that are available, for example, are very limited. So the key motivation is that the solutions that work for the developed world may not seamlessly work in the developing world. So that is the idea behind having AI for developing nations. And if I bring a few examples, for example, state-of-the-art models in language modeling might not be useful to do sentiment analysis in Sri Lanka. One thing, because the way we speak language might be very different. The other thing is, even if an expert comes and deploys the most complicated model in a Sri Lankan infrastructure and let someone take care of it, you are putting a lot of pressure on the person who's going to maintain it, and there are a lot of complexities of trying to keep the system afloat. So there might be incompatibilities between what is possible in the developed world and what is possible in the developing world. So we need to account for that. It is the same with datasets. If you train a credit scoring algorithm with datasets in the United Kingdom and you use it in a bank in Sri Lanka, the purchase patterns are very different and the algorithm will pretty much be useless. So we need to account for these things and build systems that are more useful to the developing world in terms of what we can provide. In a nutshell, what AI for developing world is putting further a few additional constraints or additional requirements on top of social good requirements in order to make sure that the systems align with the capabilities of the developing nations. So when we are looking at AI for developing nations, there are like recommended roadmaps of how you can work with it. The first thing is you need to make data available, which is a big problem in the developing nations. First, you need to have digital data to do anything with. So you need to start small, where you need to invest more on intelligent data acquisition, building better data sensors, and also first investing in models that can learn smartly with small data. And then you go for deployed systems where you transfer learning. You incorporate things like transfer learning, where you take a big model that has been trained with a lot of data and you use the small amount of data you have from the region to adopt this big system to work with your environment. And eventually, once we are in a reliable state with that level of AI incorporation, then we can influence policy and take lasting decisions based on these models. So what that pretty much means is that AI has to be good by design. And what we see in the last few years is that a lot of concepts that are fundamental to AI for social good are becoming more and more important in mainstream AI applications. For example, fair AI is a field that is under heavy research right now. So one of the areas that people are looking at is, can we look at a data set and can we algorithmically make it a more fair data set? For example, if you are working with a housing loan data set, can we identify the systematic biases that have been incorporated in the data set by social systems to marginalize minorities? Can we actually detect these things in the data set? Hence, using that, can we address that bias and make the data set more unbiased? Another interesting idea is to incorporate fairness constraints in the learning algorithms themselves. So, something that AI scientist would be familiar with is trying to optimize the loss of the function. So, part of that loss would be the degree of fairness. And there's a lot of attention going to explainable AI, where you are trying to understand AI models in ways that humans can actually understand what's going on. One way to do that is to find ways to make models more reliable and interpretable. The other way is to understand the uncertainty of the predictions. And another interesting area is taking models that have been already trained with a lot of data and adapting them to a niche use case. So these are a few cases where now the values in social AI for social good are becoming more and more important in mainstream AI. So in summary, in today's session, we looked at AI for social good efforts and the collaborations between tech and non-tech stakeholders. And we looked at and we found that it doesn't always go well, and we need to think of additional constraints that we need to account for in order to succeed. And there have been practices that have been identified, and they are also now becoming more and more important in building a conventional AI system, let alone a social good focused AI system. So this is what I wanted to convey to you today, and we can take if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them now.